All right, hey everybody, welcome back to week 7 of the Field Pass podcast. You might notice I'm missing a member of the podcast today. Braden unfortunately was unable to make it. He's got a crazy week in terms of obligations outside of the podcast territory. So he has a lot of crazy work requirements and a couple of crazy tests coming down the line as well for his college. So I'm really excited that I get to have the seat today. So why don't we just get right into it? You are officially in the Forsyth zone, uh, or so to speak. Let's go ahead and get into our 5 topics of the week. We had a really interesting week 6 of the NFL. I think that we did have a couple of games that really lived up to the expectations. I got to catch Ravens versus Commanders, which is something I was really excited for. And I think that the Commanders are going to develop into something really, really special as the season continues to go on. Um, there's just that team that I think is on the up and up and as a trajectory that many other teams are seemingly lacking, and they've hit their stride very early on in the season, and all that goes back to Jaden Daniels. But that's not who we're going to focus on first. What we're going to go right into is some midweek action within the NFL. In that of the wide receiver trades, wherein Davante Adams from the Raiders is headed off to New York to play with his former quarterback, Aaron Rodgers, on the Jets. The Jets went on to receive a third round pick out of their trade, which is conditional depending on whether or not they kind of make a deep playoff run or if Tay is a member of the first or second team All Pro. And I think that this is a pretty decent trade for the Jets. I think that um, this is not a position that they were necessarily lacking in, but the one thing I can say that the Jets certainly were lacking in is some sort of connection. And if there's any case to be made that bringing Davante Adams to New York or New Jersey um, would help to foster that connection and the seamlessness that the offense has been seeking, uh, I think that that's something that they should at least entertain. And I think that for a third round pick price, I don't think that that's necessarily an awful choice to make. Do I think that this fixes the team, or do I think that it fixes some of the major concerns that we have related to play calling, and the recent change in head coach, which is something that I think that is kind of being forgotten about at this point. Do we even really know who's going to be behind the scenes of all of this? I think most people at this point kind of have accepted that Aaron Rodgers seems to be running the show. Um, Even though he's saying that that's completely false, I have my suspicions. Um, but I'm really interested in this. I think that this is something that I guess can give the Jets a spark. I think that personally, Garrett Wilson was enough. I think that's the truth. If there wasn't any, if the connection there hadn't already been made, I guess I'm in agreement with the front office who thought it just never is going to happen. I hope that at this point, I'm almost hoping that Garrett Wilson gets traded somewhere where he can be as productive. He can be that wide receiver one because he's now in a position where he's going to be shedding some of those targets to Devontae, and I'm as an Ohio State fan, as a massive Garrett Wilson fan, I am not super excited about that. What I'm also deeply depressed about is the Bills acquiring Amari Cooper in a trade, for which the Browns were given a third round pick, and then a swap for some later round picks as well. You're gonna ask me how I feel about this if you know me in my life, and what I'm gonna tell you is that I am happy with the price that we were able to get rid of Amari for at this position and what we were able to get back in return. However, I'm also deeply depressed when it comes to the fact that he's no longer on my team anymore. It feels as if we have essentially sold away our soul, and now we have people who were dedicated to this franchise having to get sent away, and it feels like this isn't the first position where we're going to have to see some tradeaways. Hopefully, we're not talking running back in that of Nick Chubb. Hopefully, we're not talking about in defensive end, and you know who I'm talking about. I hope it's not the case. I have seen a couple people draft up a defensive end position trade featuring Zadarius Smith to the Lions, and I wouldn't be actually that mad about that. I think when it comes to getting rid of guys that potentially could be free agents, I think this makes sense. We have in terms of defensive ends, it's not that the Browns have a deep bag by any stretch of the imagination, but I trust Jim Schwartz to make do with what we have. So this just adds on to the difficult aspect of the season if you're a Browns fan, and to see Amari Cooper, who has the franchise record for receiving yards back when we had Joe Flacco, who's also on another team at this point. It's not a fun time to be a Browns fan. You're probably pretty depressed. You're probably if you're this is the thing. If you haven't already emotionally checked out as a Browns fan, I ask that you do it now for your own sake. You can delay it until Monday after we see Chubb come back and do some that's going to be amazing. You're going to my my heartstrings are going to be tugged at, and I will probably shed a couple tears, but that's not going to save the entire season. And I think it's time we jump off of this boat immediately. Let's move on to this next headline, and that of Jags losing another in their home stadium of London. And at this point, it's just embarrassing. Uh, it seems that the Bears have kind of hit their stride, but how can you not against a defense like the Jaguars and what they have going on? It's pretty embarrassing. At this point, the Jaguars should be fully accustomed to playing in London, and it didn't seem like they were. Um, DeAndre Swift was able to get moving on the ground, and as a person who has him on my fantasy team, I was particularly invested in that. The main thing I'm interested in is Doug Peterson potentially being gone before the end of this, or following the end of this week. Uh, I can't see any world in which you keep this dude on the roster. Bill Simmons talked about this on his podcast, but during a conversation with the press, Doug Peterson brought up how this team has a culture problem, which is essentially one of the like major aspects of what a coach brings to the table is developing a culture. And at this point, he's been around for long enough, in my opinion, to have way more of a impact than on the culture than he would seem to admit. Um, and at this point, I think it's I think it's franchise malpractice to keep this guy on staff, especially if they lose this game to the Patriots, which we're going to get into in the future, or just in a couple minutes actually. But I'm over Doug Peterson. I think that the change that we need to see is if you're a Trevor Lawrence fan, either from Clemson or from Jacksonville, we need to get rid of this guy as soon as possible because the Jaguars franchise has gone from an upstart and one that was moving in the right direction, like really for a considerable portion of last year to a choke in a potential playoff playoff qualifying match. And nearly a winless season for the Jags in the 2024 season. So frankly, I would be embarrassed if I'm Doug Peterson, and I think that he should be gone. I'm not calling for his job, but I think at this point, if you're the front office, there are a lot of questions that you have to ask, and based on the amount of games that they've lost, I think Doug Peterson has answered. Let's move on to the next one, and that of the Ravens Commanders game panning out in a way that I was really happy about. Braden and I talked about this last week about how this was essentially like one of the perfect encapsulations of like a rising power and a cemented quality franchise and that of Baltimore. And I think we got exactly what we were looking for. When it came to the final results of the game, I think we were kind of I can't tell if I picked I can't remember if I picked the Ravens to to I think this is my rationale was the Commander defense is just way too bad in order to sustain Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry at the same time, and that ended up being the the defining factor. But I can tell you, they definitely played up. I was actually pretty impressed by the Commanders' defense. They were able in the first half to force at least two turnovers that I saw, or at least turnover opportunities. Um, in that of an interception, which wasn't a great throw by Lamar. It bounced off a receiver, and then uh, DB started to return it in a sizable way back, and then they popped out the ball and nearly recovered the fumble. So I think that this is something that if you're Dan Quinn and you're in the front staff of the Commanders, that you should be empowered by seeing your defense playing up to these very quality teams. The one thing that I was really impressed about with the Ravens is obviously Derrick Henry. I think we've kind of in the analytic community in sports, we've reached a point where running backs are almost undervalued at this point, because you have these guys who, when you look at Derrick Henry, granted he had some serious injury issues last year, um, are incredible and are going to continue to be incredible on a franchise that have mobile quarterbacks and that have the option to run the ball. Because when you have Derrick Henry, you are going to stack that box like nobody else, and that allows for the quarterback to stand and deliver. But even then, he doesn't necessarily even have to if you have a quality thrower like Lamar Jackson. And what I saw from this most recent game against the Ravens and the Commanders is that Jaden Daniels is essentially on that territory as well. That dude can stand and deliver, but he could also run and has an awareness that I haven't seen in a really, really long time, and dare I say has been unparalleled by none other than Lamar Jackson. So I think that when it comes to analyzing this team, you should look at the Ravens as a blueprint and the prototype being that of the Commanders. And what I think a decent and the announcers were essentially talking about this. I can see this being a rivalry for years to come. Absolute cinema. Moving on to the next one, let's talk about the stomping on Jerry Jones' birthday in Dallas. What an absolute disaster for Dallas, with the highest paid quarterback only being able to put up 9 points on the Detroit Lions defense. Um, the most productive rusher on this team was Rico Dowdle with 25 yards. The Lions completely stifled the run. Granted, they didn't have as great of a rushing attack either. David Montgomery on 12 yards only got 12 carries, only was able to accomplish 80 yards and two TDs, but still way more than enough way more than enough points in order to beat the Cowboys. That clearly wasn't an issue. Um, at this point, I think you really have to start asking questions about McCarthy. Pretty embarrassing to be this winless at home, and I think that there are genuine questions that should be asked about Dak Prescott and Mark McCarthy at this point together, but it doesn't seem that Jerry Jones is willing to even entertain that thought. He was way more willing to get rid of CeeDee Lamb, who, in my opinion, is way more of a qualified and at least proven player for this team. Dak Prescott is great, like he's great, but when we find ourselves in games like this, um, I think it's fair to ask the question, like, is this guy permanently? Permanently behind the hump. He's going to have some flashes in the pan, but when it comes down to the times in which you need to win, the moments where you need to win, he's just not going to be able to do it. And in this game, he wasn't even able to get to that position. That dude put up 9 points against a offense in that of Detroit who has at this point become one of the most veritable and I think feared offenses in the NFL, especially if you're able to do it up against this Dallas defense who the DB talent on that team is undeniable. Um, that's really all I have to say about that. It's bad birthday for Jerry Jones. Jared Goff had a great game, 18 for 25, 315 yards throwing, and then three TDs. He didn't have any receiving touchdowns, which is disappointing. I would like to see him get a little bit more involved in that Detroit special. But I think that would be pretty insulting to do in a game like this. Our last headline of this week that I want to get into is the Bengals sneaking away with a win against the New York Giants, which, in my opinion, they dodged a major bullet, massive bullet, and Braden's not going to Braden's not here to speak on this, so I'm gonna do this myself, and I'm not gonna trash on them too much, even though they're my AFC North rival. They sucked. They did not look good. Their defense continued to look awful. Bad penalties, everything across the board. It's just there are Lou Anarumo has questions to answer, and frankly, he should probably have been gone a while ago. It's incredibly embarrassing that the Bengals are in this position and they squeaked out with a win. They had a 10-point margin in by the end of it, but man, that game was way closer than the score would insinuate. This was a couple plays away from being a Giants victory and a couple first fourth downs because the Giants were particularly awful on fourth down. But this is the kicker. If Malik Neighbors plays this game, I have zero doubt on my mind that the New York Giants would have gotten away with winning this one. Absolutely. It's genuinely so embarrassing that the Bengals were allowing this to happen without Malik Neighbors. This rookie is undeniably the best wide receiver, the best rookie wide receiver in the NFL that we've seen in a long time. The amount of plays that this franchise depends on Malik Nabers is unseen, has been unseen for quite a while, in my opinion. And I think that had he been in this game, he would have absolutely torched the entire state of Cincinnati through that of their NFL team. And unfortunately, I don't get to say whether or not that's the case, or have give like a definitive answer to that because it never happened. Obviously, when I made my pick, I was under the assumption that he would play, but he had a pretty serious concussion. At least that's what we're seeing. Looks like he's going to be back this following weekend in these games. So, Giants fans, you have something to anticipate and appreciate going forward because that game you deserve to win. And if you had Malik Nabers and were a healthy team, you would have won. So that's all I'll say on that matter. You can tell I'm a little bit bitter. All right, that's all that we have for our headlines. We're going to take a little bit of a break and then we're going to head into our picks for the week. A lot to say about this week. I'm really excited. Even though we don't have Braden, I think we'll be able to provide some good analysis. So thank you guys so much. We'll catch you after the break. All right, hey everybody, welcome back to the Field Pass podcast. This is the portion of the podcast where we're going to go over my picks for the week. And because it's just me, I'm on the spotlight. So feel free to track my picks and then roast me online, whatever whatever social media you would like to roast me on, feel free. You can, if I miss every single one or you whiff or you are properly insulted by the dialogue that I'm going to spit on this podcast, I have the mic. Give me some grace. We're going to get into our first game, which is Broncos versus Saints, which is going to start here in half an hour. So we have a pretty late game tonight, and you're definitely not going to hear this before the start of that game. But future Zach or future viewer, this is going to happen tonight. I think the Broncos are going to win in New Orleans. The Saints recently put Rashid Shaheed on the injured reserve, which is a incredibly fast playmaker that I think that that is going to sorely be missed. Um, we're also missing Derek Carr, which is their quarterback, which is incredibly important to this team. I think that he carried like a swagger into these first two games that has slowly but surely dwindled, and now we're getting Spencer Rattler to start. Also missing out on Olave, which is going to be an incredibly difficult uh, game for Spencer Rattler, just to say the least. Like, who are you going to be able to throw this ball to? They're also missing out on Taysom Hill, who is an incredible, like, strange quarterback tight end option, but incredibly consistent as well. Um, I think that in the moments where you're playing against a veritable defense, to say the least, and that of Denver, you need to look for those safety blankets, and they're not going to be there today for Rattler. I think it's going to be pretty gross. Uh, I think that the Broncos are going to have a great game defensively. I think that Bo Nix is going to struggle, but if he's able to lean on some of his receiving options and finally being able to connect to them in a way that he hasn't necessarily been able to over the course of the season in a compelling way, I think that this could actually be a really great and empowering game for the Broncos. I think regardless, they're going to win. The last thing I have to say about this is from Walker Nola, who on Twitter, who pointed out the Saints have lost 5 straight primetime games at home. That's all I'm going to say about that matter. I don't know if you if those stats are compelling to you at all. But all I'm saying is that I'm taking the Broncos in this one tonight. Moving on, we have Pats Jags in London again. And believe it or not, I'm actually going to take the the Pats in this one. I am really excited for Drake May. Uh, I think he had a really tough go of it on the road, and I'm thinking that this is the game that they were anticipating that Drake May would kind of uncork the bottle, so to speak. We kind of have seen, and this is something that Bill Simmons also uh, posted or at least pointed out on his podcast. I draw a lot of my inspiration from him. It's one of the main reasons I do this. But he pointed out, remember the way that our rookie quarterback started out this season. Bo Nix didn't look great. Still not looking amazing, but he's looking considerably better than he did in the first 2 games of the season, which I think he had 0 passing touchdowns and 4 interceptions. Um, Caleb Williams didn't look great. Has continued to look better and put together an offense that, despite the offensive coordinator potentially being fraudulent, um, is productive. Jaden Daniels is probably at this point off very clearly offensive rookie of the year potential, if not Malik Neighbors. Great question as to whether or not you think either of those guys should get the nod. I personally think that it should be Jaden Daniels at this point, which just speaks to the fact that all these guys started out with a difficult week one, and they continue to progress into being veritable and extremely competent quarterbacks within their divisions and within the entirety of the NFL, with maybe the exclusion of Bo Nix. Um, I think this is what they're looking for. I think that Drake May is going to have a much better game against a really crappy defense. They are away, which I think can throw so many things into question, and they're international, which can be pretty difficult. But I do think Drake May is going to have a much better game. The one thing that I think that the Pats do have to be cognizant about is Tank Bigsby. That man is scary and he's going to be productive. Um, an additional aspect of this Pats team is that they're missing uh, Travis Etienne. It looks like D'Ernest Johnson is going to get the start, who, as formerly a Cleveland Brown, is incredibly decent as well. So I think that these two options are very dangerous offensive weapons. And I think that when it comes to a Jags offense, and really the entire team, who lacks momentum and playmaking abilities, I personally have faith that Bigsby is going to be uh, probably one of their main offensive weapons, and the only reason, not the only reason, but like when it comes to generating big plays and competent offense, I think Tank Bigsby is going to be pretty important. And all I'm saying is that Pat's plus 190 money line looks really, really good. Titans Bills. I'm going to take the Bills on this one. I think that if you're a Titans fan, please message me and let me know if this is true. But from what I'm seeing on social media, is that people are genuinely questioning the roster move of Bill Callahan. Uh, Especially when it comes to the way that he's kind of molded Levis. It seems that Levis last year and Levis currently are completely different people. And it seems that a lot of people are putting that on Callahan, which is something that I didn't necessarily expect to be the case. I think that Bill Callahan was actually one of the better uh, offensive because he was an offensive side of the ball position coach. Um, but offensive head coach acquisitions over the course of the entire NFL. And I think that if you're I mean, how can you be satisfied if you're a Titans fan right now? Your offense stinks. DeAndre Hopkins has virtually been a non-factor. So I think that this is going to be super gross. I think Will Levis is going to stink, and I think that Amari Cooper, unfortunately, is going to be great, and I think it's going to break my heart. So I'm going to take the Bills, and if you pick the Titans in this game, please tell me what you are seeing. Bills. Let's move on to the next game, and that of Houston and Green Bay. I am anticipating that this could be a really good game. The Packers are hosting the Texans, which is something that if you're a team visiting Green Bay and you're visiting Lambeau, you should be afraid. There are very many reasons as to why you should be afraid. I think it's going to be difficult for the Texans to adjust to the weather. Uh, it's been really gross here in the Midwest over the past couple of days. It should not be 40, like 38 degrees Fahrenheit in mid-October. I think that's ridiculous, and I think that that might show up against the Packers. Nonetheless, I you know what? I have in here that oh, I have in here, and I did this last week, and it actually ended up working out for me. I think my intuition uh is getting better. They're hosting at Green Bay, and the Texans are really banged up. They're missing two linebackers, a defensive tackle in Fatou Kassi, and two DBs, which the Vikings were very able to take advantage of with Jeff. Now, granted, the Packers don't have Justin Jefferson, and they do have some injuries, and I think Watkins is questionable as to whether or not he would play. But I'm actually going to change my pick. I'm going to take the Packers in this one. Uh, I think this is where the Texans get their next loss. I think the conditions are going to be pretty gross. Um, Josh Allen, please save me. Moving on, we have the Lions versus the Vikings, which I think is going to be a great game. I think that this is going to be incredibly entertaining. And although the Vikings, I don't know, you tell me, do you think that they've put together at least a compelling enough resume? They've beat the Jets, the Packers, the Texans, the Niners, the Giants, all in relatively, I don't know, convincing fashion. I think, I mean that 34-7 win over the Texans is ridiculous. We just touched on that with Texas missing their two DBs in that game. They got a win over the Packers, which they prevented a pretty impressive Jordan Love comeback, and they, in my opinion, like this game was real. The Jets Vikings game was good, but one of those touchdowns was off of a Hail Mary. Like, do we really want to count that when we're thinking about I mean, that could easily just been a 10-23 game. I think they have a pretty good resume. I think that the Lions are just this good, though. I think that they're going to be able to go into Minnesota and get a win on the road against the Minnesota Vikings. I know we touched earlier about how David Montgomery wasn't necessarily as productive against Dallas, and he's going against a really difficult team in defense, ran by Brian Flores in Minnesota. I do think, though, that this will be a great opportunity for the Lions to bend but not break following the Aiden Hutchinson injury. I think that that's something that you do have to be a little bit nervous, well, considerably nervous about if you're a Lions fan, but this is a great opportunity to prove the world that you can hang. And within inner division rivalry, perfect moment. Unfortunately for the Vikings, TJ Hawkinson doesn't look like he'll play. Know they're really eager to get him back just because he just provides another dynamic level to this offense. Not going to be the week. I really do think the Lions are kind of gonna come out with a win in this one. Moving on to the next one, we have Seahawks at Falcons. I am, and let me be careful here, not impressed by the Seahawks. I know I made my gambit last year about the Seahawks not making the playoffs, and it has been an incredibly rough couple of weeks, man. The Niners put up 36 points on them, Giants put up 29 points, and then the Lions just stomped them 42-29. Um, they have been on a downward spiral, and when you look at your first three games, it's fair to question, in my opinion, whether or not this team was ever really legit. The Dolphins, who stink at this point, they're very clearly awful, and I'm pretty sure at this point, Tua was also out. Let me check just to make sure. Yeah, we were seeing Skylar Thompson ball at this point. That's why are we even counting this as a game? Um, and then Patriots, and then uh, win over the Broncos. I mean, two pretty decent defenses in that of New England and the Broncos, but each of those teams put 20 points up on you. Like, you should be embarrassed by that. And I think when it comes down to it, I think the Falcons are going to be uh, incredibly capable at spraying the ball out. And I think that when it comes to their defensive playmakers, they actually show up. We're still waiting on that Kyle Pitts to be as dominant as we were expecting him to be. I've not lost hope necessarily just yet. I think it might be one of the only people. But um, I don't know, man. I think it's going to be ugly. I think the Falcons are going to beat them. And I think that when it comes to this defense on the Seahawks, I think it's definitely regressed. Like, not necessary, like not worth writing home about. They've always, like, it seems that they've been like in the Frisky region. I don't. I think this is it's officially, they have officially been downgraded to like the gross "don't touch me with a stick, please" division. I'm not a fan of how they look, and I think that the Falcons are going to be able to capitalize on that. I think Kirk's going to be able to do whatever he wants. Give me the Falcons. Dolphins, Colts. Talk about not touching a game with a stick. That's nasty. Dolphins, Colts is not going to be fun. Um, I have at this like it seems that the criticisms levied at Mike McDaniel when it comes to being a quarterback coach have come to fruition, and they seem to be true because he can't get anything moving with Tyler Huntley, who I thought looked. I mean, that dude's really good. Like he's granted, this is a kind of a stupid statistic, is a Pro Bowl quarterback and was very functional for the Ravens. And I don't like the way this Dolphins teams look. I think the defense looks awful, and I am. I have to pick the Colts because I think that Anthony Richardson by himself is way more explosive and provides way more opportunities for success than the entire Dolphins team, other than maybe Tyreek Hill. But I just trust Anthony Richardson because he's a quarterback. So gross. This provides another opportunity for Anthony Richardson to be great. Just please, please, please don't turn it over. That's been a major issue for him. And don't get hurt. I know that's asking kind of a lot, but I'm gonna pick Indy in this one. Gross. That's all I want to speak on this. The next game that I'm not excited about, because how can you be excited about anything if you're a fan of this team during the season, is Bengals Browns. But yeah, I'll keep going with that. We are seeing the return of Nicholas Jamal Chubb, which is something that every Browns fan should be incredibly excited for. I don't know if you're a Browns fan, you have to read uh, the column that Nick Chubb wrote. First of all, great writer. Who knew? But he is. He's. You can tell that he's bought into the city, and the only way that we are like, I don't like. I think the season's already over, but the only thing that we can at least get like something redeemable about this is if he comes and plays well and he can prove to the world that he's still who he is. And I'm not necessarily even expecting that. I just want him to just be like functional. Like we don't want to see Celtics like Shaq out there. I don't think that's the case. I don't even I hate that I even brought that up. But I think that um I think that this could actually be a decent game for the Browns. I'm still expecting Deshaun Watson to be absolutely awful. If it were up to me, he would be benched right now, but he would not be coming out during halftime. Like that's maybe a realistic not realistic expectation, but like I think it's a realistic ask. Um, so Nick Chubb's coming back. It's home in Cleveland. That's the kicker. And I know that for some of you guys who are not AFC North fans, it, you understand like division rivalry. There are just some times where you win games that you shouldn't. Realistically, the Browns should not win this game, but I think that the Bengals defense is bad enough to to let us get something moving on the ground. I think that they make enough mistakes in order to keep us in the game, and I think our defense is going to step up and play at a decent level. Um, they're going to be playing for Chubb, man. That's you have your friend coming back. That dude is the soul of this entire franchise. We saw it ripped out of us last year in week two. Um, this is a massive get back. And I think that Joe Burrow is going to really struggle. He tends to struggle whenever he's in Cleveland. Genuinely bad. Trust me on this. I'm not saying trust me that they'll win, but trust me that it's not going to be a pretty game for Joe. I am going to pick the Browns to win this, which is actually something that I think we're going to eke by. Eagles Giants. I was not impressed by the Giants last week. Just coming to this as a, or sorry, with the Eagles last week as a Browns fan, I think this Giants team is not good. I don't think they're great, but I think Malik Neighbors is, and I think that Daniel Jones knows that if he gets that ball to him, then it doubles the chance that they win. I know that it looks like he's going to be playing this week, and I think against an Eagles defense that hasn't been up to par, I think like Sirianni has got his like weird swagger back, but it's not in like a cool way. It's just in a spiteful way, and I think it's going to come right back on him. And I think it's possible that like people get sick of this, and I'm not saying he'll get fired this season, but I think people are going to get really, really annoyed with Nick Sirianni coming after last week where he was yelling and just like dismissing concerns about the offense. I don't what like you're the head coach of this thing, man. Like you are responsible for that. Like AJ Brown and Smith returning, like it didn't. Granted, the Browns defense is good, but like they didn't. I wasn't impressed. Like it wasn't moved. It didn't move me. The Eagles barely eked by that. And with Malik Neighbors back, give me the Giants. Like I don't even play. Like I'm not. I can't pick the Eagles at this point. They need to prove me wrong. Raiders Rams. I really don't want to like talk about this game. It's just like, and the fact that it's at 4 alongside some of these other games, it's like it's nasty. I think I saw that the third game that we're going to about talk about here in this 4:05 slate, or this 4 o'clock slate is vastly better than these next two. But Raiders Rams, gross, man. Do I really have to speak about this? The Raiders have lost Devontae Adams, and they have the worst rushing attack, and they don't know who's going to be playing quarterback. Like, and somehow the Brown situation is worse, but we're not gonna we won't talk about that. We won't draw that out a little much longer. I think that with Stafford playing and with Cooper Kupp returning, I think that's a major get for the Rams, and hopefully Puka Nacua can return here soon. I think when it comes down to it, I think that that connection enough is enough to win this game, even though the Rams are 1-4, which is oof, gross. Bad game, Rams. Panthers, Commanders. I think that do we even man, there's some stinkers in here. Carolina Panthers at the Washington Commanders. I think that this is going to be really embarrassing. I do feel bad for the Panthers. They at least they had something. What they had to appreciate was their defense, and they have had pretty back-breaking injuries on that defensive front. And I feel bad. Like that stinks. It's you want at least something that you can hold on to. I think a lot of these bad teams at least have something that they can look to and say like, okay, that's something that we can build off of. The Panthers do not at this point. You had a couple of good weeks of Andy Dalton, and then we kind of regressed to the mean. Not a fan of how this team looks. Jaden Daniels is mini Lamar, and he could potentially become as good. Commanders. This is the game that we're talking about as way better than anything else in the 4 o'clock slate, and that is, of course, Chiefs Niners, and I'm picking the Chiefs. The major reason why is, uh, first of all, I'm not moved by them being in San Francisco. I know that the fans are gonna be super loud. It's gonna be an intense matchup, given that it's a Super Bowl repeat. But I'm just not moved. Uh, and the major reason for that is I think the Niners defense has majorly regressed. They are at this point no longer the leaders, or they do not set the standard for what it means to have an acceptable defense. 24 points against by the Seahawks team, which I think is really, really bad. Niners, sorry, they lost the game to the Cardinals, who no one has a read on them, but 24 points against the Cardinals, really. Um, 13, they allowed Jacoby Brissett to get 13 points on you. 27 to the only win that the Rams have is against the Niners. Like, come on, 27 points, 23 points scored by the Vikings, which is actually kind of impressive, and then 19 points by the Jets. I just think that we don't have any reason to believe that this is the same Niners defense that was giving Patrick Mahomes trouble in the Super Bowl. And I think with some of their injuries that they have, with Debo being limited and Jordan Mason limited, even though they're expected them to play, it's going to be really difficult for them to stop Patrick and Travis Kelce. And at this point, Juju Smith-Schuster, who had a pretty decent game last week, one point of concern is that a hamstring injury designation did show up in the injury report. So I don't know. It's those. Whenever I see hamstring injuries, I get really, really concerned, especially for the game after. And uh, I'm not a fan of that. It's very possible that he doesn't play. But I still am going to take the Chiefs. I'm not betting against Patrick Mahomes. Um, Jets Steelers. I actually think the Jets are going to win this one. Uh, the main reason why is I think that when it comes down to it, I think the change to Russell Wilson is going to be a bad move. I don't trust them to be able to. I don't trust him to be able to make the correct reads at this point, man. Like his age is showing. I think that the wide receivers are. I don't know. They didn't even necessarily have a productive time under Justin Fields' tenure, which I think is what they're trying to get with the switch to Russell Wilson. But I don't even think that's going to be the case, and it's definitely not going to show against a very competent New York Jets defense. I really do hope that this starts to work out, or this like looks to be working for the Jets when it comes to the Devontae Adams and Aaron Rodgers connection. Like this would be a great time for it to happen against a very, very, very competent defense, especially against TJ Watt. Don't like that guy. I'm going to pick the Jets. Don't feel great about it, but I think that Russell Wilson is going to have a really bad game. Ravens Bucks. Great game. I'm really, really excited for this. I think it's actually going to be super, super close. I still haven't figured out this Ravens defense. I think that they play down instead of playing up when it comes to the teams that they're facing. Um, and it's not that the Buccaneers offense is any worse than the Ravens. In fact, they might be better, to be honest. Um, but I still don't think that they're going to be able to uh like I don't think the Bucks are going to be able to move it on the Ravens in the way that they were able to move it on the Saints. And I think that Baltimore is gonna pull away after the third quarter. I do think it will be close though. Finally, and thanks for listening, by the way, this was fun. Um, Chargers Cardinals. Now, last week I kind of put a lot of disrespect on the Chargers, and I felt bad. I kind of felt like it's kind of my my obligation as an Ohio State fan. You have cheating Jim Harbaugh and Jesse Minter, who I don't like. And as much as I do not like them, uh, they put up a very, very good defensive front. And I think that everyone should be impressed by the Chargers defense, which is something that you wouldn't even think about saying under Brandon Staley. Props to Jim Harbaugh for being able to get this done. Um, they proved me wrong. And we don't really know if Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to play. He went out super early. I think he had 2 targets last week, and I think it was with a concussion. Um, I don't trust this offense without him, especially against the defense that I saw in the Chargers. Now, the main thing with the Chargers is that they're gonna have to find a way to move the ball, and I'm not impressed by Quentin Johnston like it or Johnson. Like we really thought that he was well, not maybe who's we. The NFL was hoping that he'd be able to step it up and I don't know, be a wide receiver one. I'm sure that that's what they were hoping for when they drafted him. He's just not shown up. And I know that Jim Harbaugh likes to run it, but at some point, this guy has to get productive, or you need to acquire someone. Devontae Adams would have been great. Now, would they probably wouldn't have made that trade because it's in division, but like I don't know, find somebody. Amari Cooper would have been a really solid for this team. But I think that they should definitely be looking out. I know that Jim Harbaugh doesn't like to throw, but you have to if you want to compete at this level. Um, so just with the injuries, I'm going to take the Chargers, uh, and I think that the defense is going to be able to make them pay. Thank you so much, guys. I really appreciate it. It was a really fun time just being able to do this by myself. We've officially ended the Forsyth Zone. Like I said, if you have any interest in like getting your look back, so to speak, against me, please feel free to let me know on my social media, Instagram, Twitter, uh, TikTok, Snapchat, whatever. Um, so I really appreciate you guys sticking around. This has been a really fun podcast, and I've had a great time being able to do this with Braden, but also just being able to uh, just speak our mind about the way we uh, think this league is going and how we are interpreting this game that we love. So thank you guys so much for sticking around. We really appreciate it. Um, have a great weekend. Peace.